This is the way losers acting around misfits. Pound for pound, I'm the listing. You can bounce and get dismissed. Clown, get this. Couldn't walk a mile wearing my Fitbit. Competition is non-existent.
Welcome to 3 Count Commentaries. Today's topic is going to be the disillusionment of AEW fans and how AEW has failed to maintain being an alternative to WWE, and it has upset quite a few of the fans. So to kind of set this up, it's going to come across like a Smark's Tears, because I'm going to be reading some disillusioned comments from Twitter. That being said, it's not quite a Smark's Tears, because not everybody is crying. Mostly of them are just kind of disappointed. Big disappointed dad energy from a lot of these folks here in AEW land. And so we're going to go through it. So a lot of these people are big AEW fans. They're reply guys, etc., who have large followings. And a couple of developments over the last couple of weeks on AEW TV has led to them being upset. One being is the signing of Ric Flair. The second being Paul White, a.k.a. The Big Show, being Chris Jericho's partner. So this has led to a lot of people looking at AEW and saying, oh my God, what happened to my wonderful alternative? What happened to it? Tony Khan is trying to kill it. And so we're going to talk about it. All right. So here's one of the big reply guys too. As usual, I'm not going to say names unless it's a wrestling journalist or somebody that you probably already know. I think people are down on what AEW has become because they were so high on what AEW originally set out to be. They were the company that said, we want to change the world. Now they're the company that says, this is just how wrestling is now. They conformed, and that sucks. The weird thing about this is that AEW fans have a twisted, euphoric idea of what AEW was supposed to be and what it used to be. And they're kind of upset that a lot of the super indie of AEW has been squeezed out for the most part. And I get that. At the same time, though, only WWE, despite being the largest wrestling promotion, only WWE was doing things the way that they did it. Other wrestling promotions did way off the top things with a bunch of skits and comedy and a bunch of other crap. They were wrestling blow up dolls. They were wrestling children. They were doing a lot of crazy stuff on the independent, setting each other on fire, jumping off of balconies, all kind of crazy stuff. And AEW still has some of that. The only thing that they didn't have, and even GCW has this, is a lot of older guys coming back. And what GCW does that. Other wrestling promotions still bring in older talent, whether it's Tuco Scorpio when it comes to like GCW, or Ricky Morton has done the independents here and there. Guys, there was wrestling companies that still bring in people like Enzo, or bring in people like Jerry King Lawler when he was still active. Guys like Rhino was still getting booked. I mean, the idea that AEW is doing something that was foreboding 4 or 5 years ago is ridiculous. It signed with Chris Jericho as being a top star, and Chris Jericho was almost 50. What are they doing different? And then one of their big signings after that was Mark Henry. And then another big signing after that was Matt Hardy. They're not doing anything different than they already had. The fact of the matter is this. You just don't like Big Show and Ric Flair. And a lot of this stuff is political, by the way, because they got a lot of political stuff we're going to get into. Not, Democrats and Republicans, but basically they feel AEW has lost its goodwill. Basically, they lost the moral authority. But let's continue. Here's another one. If nothing else, at least the last 6 months has definitely proven that a more entertainment-based product to pander to the mythical casual fan was always a terrible, dumb, bad idea, and everyone who ever suggested it should be shamed and ashamed. 6 months, a more entertainment-based product was pandered to a more mythical casual fan. Again, this idea that the casual fan does not exist, which only exists in the minds of AEW fans. They think there's hardcores and then no one else. And then, of course, it's like a horseshoe, the old horseshoe theory, because the hardcore fans think that's all it is. But then also like the Vince Russo sect and the Cornette sect think that's all there is. They don't understand that there's a lot of people there in the middle who can watch this shit, but also not watch it. They don't necessarily live it. They don't necessarily love it. And they consume it passively. They watch a little bit of Raw, a little bit of SmackDown, a little bit of AEW, but they don't obsess over it. And like I talked about this before when it came to, I think it was Raven, who talked about, the levels of fandom, that people listen to certain things, and then there's people who get actively involved in it, and then there's people who constantly talk about it. If you are on this end, which is what I do, you constantly talk about it, you have a podcast, you do videos or whatever, you're a little bit more in depth than most people. So sometimes you're in a bubble, and when you're in that bubble, you tend to believe that this is all there is, but that's not true. There's a lot of fans who are passive, who they look at clips and stuff on TikTok or YouTube or whatever. That's where they consume their wrestling content. They're not sitting down watching 3 hours of Raw, 2 hours of Dynamite, 2 hours of Collision, an hour of Rampage. That was never going to be the case. Television has changed too much for that. So these people are disillusioned, and they think that they are the only people who exist. Wrestling should be for us and no one else. It's this kind of gatekeeping idea that will end up shrinking the business. It's because super fans think that they should be the only ones who enjoy the product. It's like making movies only for critics. It doesn't work that way. The average Joe is not a movie critic. He likes what he likes. And if he likes a movie that critics think are garbage, then so what? There should be somebody who's there to create the quote-unquote garbage that the average person likes. And WWE is that. Again, you can have fine dining, but it's too expensive and people don't like the portion sizes. Or you can have McDonald's and people can supersize themselves and eat Big Macs and French fries, and you can look down upon it all you like. But ultimately, people will make their own decisions. Now, even when AEW was popular, and it was a fad, by the way, which is, we'll get into that in a moment. It doesn't matter, because WWE was serving the casual audience. That's the people who passively watch the show. They passively watch the show, and they want to see stars, and they want to see stars doing interesting things. If that's a backstage segment and comedy segments, they'll do that. If it's active, then they'll do that too. So it's different. While AEW was all about matches and different kinds of matches and bringing in people from Japan and bringing in people from Mexico, and they still do all of that stuff, and these people are still upset. They're still upset. Here's somebody from Fightful. She actually is a wrestling journalist, and these are a bunch of quotes and kind of like a conversation between Tony Khan and the audience. We want a second women's match. I can give you Jeff Jarrett challenging for another title. Just another women's Jericho plus Stables plus ratio. Begging you for more screen time. Woo! So basically, every time they say they want more women, they get another legend thrown in their face. And this is entertaining because Tony Khan, as usual, is trying to connect with the audience. And he knows that wrestling fans are always looking at, older guys in a new environment, which, has traditionally done okay in the wrestling space. It's not a great idea to dump so many of them on you, but it's typically I've never seen this guy outside of WWE before. What is he going to do? What's going to possibly happen here? And then that brings people attention. But the hyper-focused on individual issues, like this young lady who's hyper-focused on women's wrestling, it's very, very entertaining watching them have a meltdown because they can't get what they want, even though it doesn't really pander to the casual fans. It builds off of what we just said. The casual fans are more interested in what Ric Flair is going to do than if you decide to have some women's match on the show. They think you should cut off your nose to spite your face. And I'm not saying that the women's matches are automatically not going to draw. Historically, they haven't drawn, but they also don't put any effort into the storylines either. If they put in some effort into the storylines, then maybe the women can draw. So that's just something to think about. But that's a overall issue, not just a women's division issue when it comes to AEW. Here's another one. Haven't been a regular AEW TV viewer for a couple of months now because the product's swerving away from the stories and talent I enjoy most about them. Feel like a fan right now. I'm just waiting for that next new great thing to come along in the industry, something major. In other words, the new car smell has worn off. Now it's business as usual in terms of a wrestling show. It's not new anymore. It's not hot anymore. So I'm going to move on. It's people who are chasing fads. And this is very unfortunate, but there's a lot of people who are like this. And there was a lot of people who were like this in the wrestling space. That they didn't really care about AEW. They just cared that AEW was new and that AEW was somewhat different than WWE and that AEW had a new ownership and there was a new presentation. But how long could it be new? You can't be new forever. You get a new girlfriend. It's like, okay, well, then now you're in a 5-year relationship. She's not your new girlfriend anymore, right? It's not new anymore. You can have new aspects of your relationship, but the relationship itself is not new anymore. The honeymoon period is over, and it's pretty obvious. It was pretty obvious with the CM Punk shenanigans that the honeymoon period was ending, but now it's officially over, and some of the people who were just on board because it was a new hot thing are starting to move on, and they were pretty quiet about it. Like a lot of these people, they weren't actively saying that they stopped watching AEW months ago. This guy says he stopped watching it regularly months ago. But he's still a reply guy on social media. He still collects tons and tons of likes talking about Dynamite and Rampage and Collision. So that means he secretly was not really watching the show. That should tell you how phony a lot of this stuff is. Now, this guy is from Sedgwick, from, I think it's What Culture. He says AEW actively, by itself, shedding its reputation as the alternative and the babyface promotion is astonishing. Never thought I'd see it. The babyface promotion is that they don't do business with scummy people. This came from Tony Khan, who talked shit about Vince McMahon and banned Hulk Hogan from ever attending an AEW event. So now he's bringing in Ric Flair, who these folks have decided is the Antichrist. And it's entertaining to watch people get upset. But is that all it took? Is for one unsavory signing? Well, I guess two, because if you count Jay Lethal. And a lot of people bitched about Jay Lethal, but a lot of people didn't know that Jay Lethal was accused of sexual harassment. A lot of people didn't know that. So now that it's pretty obvious when it comes to Ric Flair. So now people are saying AEW is no longer the babyface promotion. You know, all wrestling promoters, and we're going to get into this a little bit later too, are scumbags, you know, billionaires, you can't trust them, all this stuff. Here's another big reply guy, and this is a quote. Because of Tony Khan's behavior and decisions, I'm going to stop watching AEW for a while. It's crazy to me. So you are watching the company for the owner? Like, it's obvious for me that I'm watching because I'm supporting wrestlers appearing on the show. I'm going to watch Rampage because I want to see the Lucha 3-Way, Sky Blue and Marina Shafir, and Daniel Garcia in a singles match finally. Not because of someone who's in charge. Always support the wrestlers you like, because such a strong connection with the owner of the wrestling company is going to always end in the same result. I'm not going to lie to you. 90% of it was people having an emotional attachment to AEW. That's what most of this stuff was. It wasn't because of the high quality of talent. It always had bullshit talent. Sonny Kiss used to be on this show. Michael Nakazawa used to be on this show. Brandon Cutler used to be on this show. Technically, looking at the talent is better than it used to be. The talent is better than it was 3 or 4 years ago. The issue here is that, again, it's no longer the hot new promotion. Now it's been around for a while. A lot of the goofier things about AEW have dissipated. They've run off a lot of the casuals. So now all they have is the hardcore fans. The people who were energized when AEW started because it was new and it was different and it was something, new going on. Those people quickly, they left, if we're being honest. They dipped a little bit. But then CM Punk came in and a lot of those people came back. But then the CM Punk drama drove them off again. And now here we are. And a lot of the hardcores are upset and disillusioned because they loved CM Punk and Tony Khan made the executive decision to get rid of him. And, a lot of this animosity for AEW is coming from that too. But don't underplay the emotional investment people had in AEW from the beginning. Not because the talent was great, not because the promotion was any good, not because the shows were any good, but because it was different and they had taken the bait. AEW fished in the oceans of we're going to be different, we're going to have all the women are going to be paid the same as the men. They're going to get the same amount of exposure and all this kind of stuff. And then it turned out to not be true, But I think most people who were paying attention, and, maybe some handsome devils who are on the internet who do podcasts kind of figured that it wouldn't be the same thing, of course. Here's another one. I won't be watching AEW for a while, to be honest. The fact that it was supposed to be an alternative only to hire and do the same shit WWE has done basically destroyed any goodwill the company had with me. Here's another one. I gave up trying to watch weekly when I realized it made me feel the same way as WWE did when Vince was fully in control. Interesting. Here's another one, a big reply guy. The veil has well and truly been lifted now. AEW have shared their reputation as a beacon of hope in a historically scummy industry and embraced their role as maintainers of status quo. Hope a lot of fans learn lessons about tying their identities to promotions and standing billionaires. Interestingly enough, this idea of AEW's reputation as a beacon of hope, where did that come from? That was all because people had completely outsized expectations of what AEW could do and where AEW lied or lay in the landscape of wrestling. This only is disappointing to you if you had this vision of AEW overtaking the industry, changing how wrestling is done, and all this kind of, which they were never going to do. It was never going to be whatever you thought it was going to be. This is one of these, you look at a graph and you take it up 5 spaces, and that's expectations. You take up 3 spaces on the next part of the graph, that's reality. All of the stuff that the Young Bucks and Cody told you when this thing started was never going to occur. It was never going to occur. All right? Everything that you thought, that all the bullshit that you bought was never going to happen. It was always going to be this way. When AEW brought in Paul White and they brought in Mark Henry, it was always going to be this way. The whole point of this was to try to bring in people who were saying AEW is now a legitimate wrestling company because we have legitimate stars, legitimate legends are coming over. This was what they were so happy about when Moxley came in. This is why they were happy when Matt Hardy came in. When Jeff Hardy came in, they were like, yeah, man, AEW is the hot new thing. Everybody wants to jump on it. And then they did. It's exactly what you asked for. You wanted people to leave WWE and jump onto AEW. And that's exactly what happened. And now you're complaining about it. Because you're like, no, not him. No, not them. And I'm looking like, what do you mean? You guys wanted the legitimacy of having top level superstars that people know come to your promotion. And you got that. You got it when CM Punk came in. You screwed the pooch on that. You got it when Edge came in. You got it when Christian came in. You got it with Matt Hardy. You got it with Jeff Hardy. You got it with Big Show. You got it with Mark Henry. And now you're like, there's too many old guys. You had the legitimacy when Jericho started with the company. And then you said, well, now there's too many old guys. Billy Gunn's in the main event. He's 60. Nobody said anything about that. But this is what you asked for, bro. You wanted the legitimacy of being seen as a legitimate wrestling company. You brought in Sting. And you were energized about this because it made AEW seem like a big deal. It made it seem like a hot spot that people were leaving WWE to come to AEW. The only problem is a lot of those people were old. Now, there was quite a few people that WWE either fired or they asked to be released from WWE, and then they came over. Malachi Black, Andrade, Keith Lee, a couple of other people. And then they were brought into AEW, and then they dissolved in water. You know, Adam Cole, Bryan Danielson. I mean, a lot of injuries and a lot of other things occurred. You know, Miro. You got a lot of bad creative decisions that happened right out of the gate. And that has caused a lot of animosity. So, because now that these guys aren't new anymore, they've been around 2 or 3 years now. So now you're hoping that guys like Drew McIntyre and Sheamus don't sign contracts with WWE so they can come in. Like, they aren't 40-year-old guys. And I know McIntyre's probably not exactly 40. He's probably like in the late 30s. But I know Sheamus is 40. And you're hoping they bring you the injection of new energy that you were looking for. But I said 2 or 3 years ago, this cannot last forever. And I figured after CM Punk and Danielson and Cole all came in at the same time that this was probably going to be it. You can't go higher than bringing somebody back who was sitting on the bench for 7 years. You can't go higher than that. So the crash was inevitable. Now, I didn't expect it to end the way that it ended. And I have to go back and listen to those videos to see if I actually was on point with thinking that CM Punk was going to ruin that. But I knew, even back then, you can't do the business model that they were doing. The surprises every week, surprises every other week, constant new signings. You eventually you're gonna have to build new stars. That was the point. And then AEW never got around to it. They managed to build one. That was MJF. Here's another one. I will always willing to at least root for AEW success until they hired Flair. It takes years for a billionaire to create a false illusion about them and just one for that illusion to die. That's what happened with TK. AEW could shut down tomorrow and I wouldn't give a fuck now. Amazing. AEW started out as NXT on steroids, became late stage WCW, and is now creeping into 2010s TNA. Amazing. Here's the thing. Their defeat of NXT was because it was NXT on steroids. But then NXT had a very, very low audience. So when you look at NXT on USA, they've been doing better numbers than they're doing now. But then again, this was 3 or 4 years ago. TV is getting changed. The slow death of cable is now starting to creep, and the tentacles are around the throat of every wrestling company nowadays. So here's JD from New York. It's looking less and less like an alternative by the week. The AEW mission statement has been abandoned and ignored from my point of view. I don't know. Is it? Good question. What was the mission statement, by the way? We're going to change the world. That was never going to happen. AEW had some really good peaks. The CM Punk thing was a good peak. All In was a great peak. They did some really good things in their run. But it was always going to come down to normal. Is this normal now? Is 800,000 viewers and 3,000 people in the arena, is that the new normal for AEW? Well, business has to change. The business has changed a little bit. Expectations. The more you hit those peaks, the more expectations change. Okay? When when AEW was beating NXT every week, everybody's like, it's going to beat Raw one day. Means the expectations changed. People are like, yeah, we're going to increase our expectations. And then you increased it too high. You reached for the sun and your hand started to melt. And now you're looking at it and you're saying to yourself, oh my goodness, what did I do? You wanted the legitimacy of having all of these older guys join AEW. You want it to be a product for niche audiences, but you can't do both. You can't have a niche product and have a popular product. It's just by the nature of things being niche, it's not popular. Right? Niche means the opposite of popular. So if you want to have a niche product, you got to deal with the lower revenue streams that come with that. And Tony Khan is in a business. He can't have a niche product that makes a ton of money. Here's a new one. People turn to AEW to be an alternative, not WWE stars from the past, but older. It's got to be weird that the more stars from the past are added, the less attendance is. Well, this is what you guys asked for. You should have started complaining. You should have said, wait a minute, there's too many of these guys when Mark Henry was brought in. You should have started asking questions when Christian was brought in. You should have started asking questions when Jeff Hardy came over. You should have started asking these questions, when Billy Gunn started creeping up the card. You should have started asking these questions. Now it's overwhelming, and It's too bad because, it's like lint. This shit collects. Like it's like lint, bro. If you don't get the lint out every day, eventually you got a head full of lint. And that's the same thing going on with AEW right now. They got a head full of lint. Here's another one. Day one, AEW fans have a legitimate reason to be upset. Back-to-back fails in less than 24 hours with Paul White and Ric Flair is the exact opposite of what AEW promised its fans. We wanted an alternative. There's this ridiculous idea that WWE relied very, very heavily on legends all the time. When in reality, usually there was like one or two legends on the card totally. Like a Goldberg or maybe somebody else. The idea that it was like, WCW or TNA, which WWE has never been that way. It's never been 90% legends. Even when they do Legends Nights or something like that. Or they do a match from, a bunch of guys from the past, like, the DX versus Brothers of Destruction kind of thing. Those things were rare. They always leaned mostly on their younger talent. And maybe they used the older talent to draw attention. But it's never been mostly 50 and 60-year-old guys in the main events. Look past over the last 2 years. Billy Gunn, Sting, Jericho. These guys have always been there. They've always been there. You're just now paying attention. You were wrapped up in the euphoria of CM Punk and MJF. And you weren't paying attention to these guys that were on the roster. And now it's becoming more obvious because they're now starting to creep up a little bit more. Because a lot of the mid-card guys that they pushed, that they like Sammy Guevara, is not working out. Like Darby Allin. It's not working out. So now they're leaning on the legends. And it's terrible creative that's making it not work out. Like, I don't like Sammy Guevara, but if you'd used him better, he probably would be in a better position right now. Okay, here's another one. I remember when AEW said they wanted to be an alternative to WWE, not just WWE Light. Jacksonville Dixie has learned absolutely nothing from the failures of WCW and TNA. Ooh, here's another one. Wasn't a big draw of AEW the idea of being an alternative to this sort of stupid, let's trot out a geriatric wrestler from multiple decades ago WWE bullshit? I remember that being a selling point of the promotion for a while. Meanwhile, Jericho was there when it started. It wasn't long before Matt Hardy came in, and Matt Hardy could barely move. Wasn't long after that before Big Show came in, or Mark Henry. I think the next year Christian was there. I mean, Sting came in. I think the same year Christian came in, Sting came in. Sting was over the age of 50 when he signed the contract. I mean, again, it's a lot political when it comes to Flair. But Flair is the most obvious case. And Flair's not going to wrestle. And we all know that. Flair can't wrestle. He's 75 or something like that. There's nothing he can do. Just his mere presence is enough to cause this kind of attention and reaction, though. So, here's another one. AEW becoming TNA, WCW, WWE Light, and that's not a good look for the company. In fact, this is a 10 steps backwards of what AEW is supposed to be. AEW is no longer the alternative anymore because dumb business moves like this. And this is coming from a diehard from 2019. And that's basically a response to the Ric Flair contract. Again, Ric Flair is a sponsor. And he was making sporadic appearances, mostly for Sting. And, well, let's talk about this, because I forgot to mention a name that has popped up on AEW that people were not upset about, and that's William Regal. Remember, he was there, too, for a little while, right? So we don't know what Ric Flair is going to do. We just know that Ric Flair is under contract, and he might just work with Andrade, which is what he wanted to do from the beginning. And, which is what when he left WWE to come over to AEW, that's what he wanted to do. And then Dark Side of the Ring ruined that. So Flair's not going to wrestle. It's not going to be TNA or, WCW in that regard, where Ric Flair's going to be wrestling in the middle of the ring. I would say that Tony Khan has lost his ever-loving mind if Ric Flair is booked to wrestle a match. But I don't see that yet. And I think Tony Khan's a little bit more responsible than that. This is the Fightful girl again. It doesn't make me mad. It's actually hurtful to be this dismissive of women who love pro wrestling. Booking complaints are one thing, but to send the message that having a nostalgia pop is more important than the respect and safety of women is hurtful. Of course, this is also a response to Ric Flair. because women are unsafe around Ric Flair, and apparently respect is like, Ric Flair hasn't done anything to these people. He hasn't done anything to like Chris Statlander or anybody like that. Somehow, whatever happened on that airplane between him and some other woman is indicative of how Ric Flair treats all women, and how Ric Flair is in, today, even though this was 20 some odd years ago, when he would have been in his 50s. Still, he would have been an adult, but he would have been in the middle of an alcohol problem then too. So it's kind of ridiculous, but according to these people, one person represents everybody, and one incident that they can, look at is indicative of your entire life. And I get it. There are certain things that if you do it even once, that kind of sticks with you forever. But having a little too much fun with a flight attendant in the middle of a drunken episode is not really indicative of normal people's behavior. When you're drunk, you don't really always behave to your best self. But here's the weird thing about this, and I said this before, and I'm going to say it every time Ric Flair's name is brought up in terms of the Dark Side of the Ring situation. Dustin Rhodes was on that flight too, doing inappropriate stuff. And Dustin Rhodes is never attacked the way that Ric Flair is. Somebody needs to explain that to me. Here's another one. The whole thing is just heartbreaking. Insane how AEW can piss up the wall so much goodwill in the space or a few insane decisions, supposed to be the alternative, that did things the right way, but now somehow WWE feels like the listening company somehow. The more the listening company. I read it as it was written, by the way. I always read these things as written. AEW isn't so much an alternative as much as a different option now for wrestling fans. It's fine. Problem has always been fans who saw Khan as some sort of messiah, enabling the insane victimization those people thought was reasonable just because they got very mad at another company. I choose to read this one last because that's the end game. That's the big picture. People looked at Tony Khan like a messiah. The elite were saints. They were the wise men. They knew everything there was to know. They were progressive. They made all of these promises. We were going to change the world. And none of that was true. 5 years later, you're now realizing it's not true. But most smart people knew that it was never going to be true. And it's just very sad that these people bought into it. But it's always fun watching AEW fans go through this, because WWE fans look at this stuff and they say, well, there's peaks and valleys. WWE has good years, they have bad years, and there's stuff that's in between. And you push through anyway because you got the Royal Rumble coming, you got WrestleMania coming, and then people will come back. Things could happen. You never know. In the world, even in bad years, the WWE might break out something that's going to be interesting. Might break out something that could be fun. Might have a storyline or unexpected character that people buy into. AEW right now is in the middle of a valley. It's a desert, actually, where there's not much going on. And the fans don't know how to handle it. A couple of bad decisions, not much going on creatively. And now they're ready to jump ship. It goes to tell you that it was just a fad. And it was all promises that were never meant to be kept. But then again, we all know that already. Thank you for your time. I'll talk to you guys later.